Dad?
Yeah.
Do you want to come with me to Peru?
No.
Well, I'm going.
You're going. With whom? Your boyfriend?
No, he doesn't want to come.
So who are you going with?
I guess I'm just gonna do it on my own.
Alone?
Yeah.
Peru?
Yeah.
I don't think so. Sign me up. I'm coming along.
Yeah! And this is how, in under 5 minutes in June 2022, that we decided to travel to Peru with my dad the following year. For a bit of context, I had never traveled outside Europe, apart from 1 week in New York City when I was a teenager, but that doesn't really count. I had never hiked in high altitude before, and although I was hiking here in Switzerland, I had never really hiked intensively for more than 2 days in a row, and this was going to be 10 days. So this is what I mean when I say that photography drives me to do hard stuff, without necessarily thinking before. But hey, sometimes all you need is to say yes to something you don't know if you can do and figure out how to do it on the way. This video is a bit different than the previous ones. I will be going over my experience going to the Peruvian Andes, what I learned, what I saw, and the reason why I am going back this year. Number 1, the preparation. When it comes to the logistics, we decided to join the team of Capture the Atlas with Dan Zafra and Asen Aynat. They were opening this tour for the very first time, but Dan had already done the trek before, and so he knew the local team there. Plus, since both speak Spanish, they were able to really facilitate the communication with the locals, which means in terms of logistics, we didn't have to do anything. And I admit it felt nice to experience that for the first time. So, how did we prepare? In June 2022, I clearly was not in a good physical shape. Not that I couldn't have made it, but if I had gone at that time, I would have put myself through so much pain and suffering because of my poor physical condition. But since we were going in June 2023, I had a full year ahead of me to get better. And about 2 weeks after we knew we were doing this, I started hitting the gym for the first time in my life. I opted for a coach that would help me with my nutrition and my fitness journey, and I started monitoring my sleep, strain, stress, calories, and weight using a Whoop band that you cannot see and a smart scale. Now, you don't need to do all this to prepare for such a trip. I was not starting all this specifically for my travel to Peru, but it gave me a clear goal to reach for the entire year, and that really fueled my decision to start this fitness journey for me. So, gym 4 to 5 times a week to build strength, run occasionally to build endurance, and continued hiking in Switzerland. Now, my dad on his side, and because I knew he didn't want to be always the last in the group, started hiking every weekend for 10 to 20 kilometers. Hiking has always been part of his life, and because of that, I felt I was clearly not doing enough compared to him. A few weeks before the trip, the post-delivery guys were becoming completely nuts with all the packages coming in every day. Most of the equipment required I already had, but that worked for shorter travels and outdoor trips in Switzerland, where you rarely spend more than 1 night outside. So I had to buy more of what I already had, plus some new equipment I would need. There were 5 main buckets of equipment. Number 1 was clothing, with merino wool layers, down jackets and pants, socks, heating gloves, and so on. By the way, now 2 things I bought specifically for that trip, and that has been the best investment I've ever made in terms of clothing for outdoor hiking and camping, is down socks or shoes, whatever you want to call them. They are basically sleeping bags for your feet. They work incredibly well. That just made my night so much better. And the second thing is heating socks. So I had heating gloves already. Heating socks was also an incredibly good alternative, especially when you spend so much time outside by night, shooting the Milky Way, the stars, whatever. You stay in the same spot without moving for several minutes or hours, depending on how long you do it. And so I had just these long pairs of socks, and you just attach a battery to them that looks like that, and you kind of just charge them with a USB-C port once you lock them directly here. Otherwise, you just come and you lock them directly on the socks like that. But yeah, discovered that for the trip, and definitely cost me a little fortune, but an investment that was worth it. Second bucket was photography. with lenses, extra batteries, memory cards, tripods because you need several ones, a star tracker, which was the first time I invested in that, and a drone. I bought a drone for that trip. Completely worth it. Honestly, no problem. There are no restrictions, I believe, to fly drones, especially, I mean, you have no one around. It's just mountains and you. So drone has never been a problem and definitely an investment worth doing if you go to such incredible views. Number 3 was electronics. So this meant solar panels, headlamps, power banks. I had so many power banks, adapters, chargers, and a satellite phone, so that I could just send some messages to family to say that my dad was sick, or actually it was a good way for me to communicate with my dad because you have no service up there. So I could at least send him SMS from the hotel, because you'll understand why later. 4th bucket was everything related to medications. So sunscreen, medications for altitude sickness, things like traveler's diarrhea, cuts, and everything you can think of. And the 5th bucket is outdoor. So that meant hiking poles, caps, shoes, backpack, bottles, and yeah, basic stuff. And now about the trip. Every day I kept a diary of the trek, both a physical notebook and one on my phone. So now I'm gonna break down a little bit day by day how the trek happened, how the travel happened. Some days will be skipped just because they are not that interesting, or covered in the next one. So, day 1. This day was mostly driving from Lima to Huaraz, where we would spend the first 4 days acclimatizing to the altitude. On that way, we basically went from sea level up to 4,100 meters to reach a mountain pass, and then slightly down to Huaraz, which stands at 3,200 meters. We first stopped at that pass to enjoy the sunset, and I kid you not, the moment I started just walking outside the bus, I almost fell because I was dizzy within seconds. You can feel the altitude right away. Our bus then continued, and eventually someone decided to tell our driver that it was making a weird, loud, clunky noise, so we decided to stop. Only to realize that one of the wheels were coming off the bus. Just a normal day in Peru. And once we arrived, we headed to our first dinner together in town. The altitude was real again. I felt something was off just while walking to the restaurant, just as if I was completely drunk. We sat at the table and it took me 5 minutes before I fainted. And so I had the privilege of being the first one to experience the benefits of coca tea, known to help you with these kind of symptoms. First acclimatization hike. It was supposed to be easy. It was not. That day I decided to load my backpack on purpose to make my life more difficult. Don't ask me why. Terrible idea. Didn't do it the following day. And I realized I had to tape my feet if I didn't want to end up with blisters screwing up my trip. The sleep is absolutely terrible in high altitude. One thing I found interesting though was to witness how my body was reacting to the altitude, because I was wearing my Whoop band. Heart rate was wild, and I was burning 3 times more calories than average. We went on our second hike that day, and the lighter backpack definitely made a difference. No Sherlock. And one thing that tremendously helped was simply to focus on the breathing on the way up. So I didn't feel it was as hard as the previous day, even though the hike was more difficult. Last acclimatization hike. This time we woke up around 1:30 a.m. to be there for sunrise. And I thought I could continue sleeping in the bus, but it was impossible because the roads were so bumpy that we even had a member of the group that came from India who said something like, that really reminds me of the countryside road I have back home. So yeah, this is how bad it was. Unfortunately, many people started feeling really sick with their stomachs, including my dad. Some couldn't make it to the top and to the end of the hike, and others really struggled to get there. Nonetheless, it looked amazing all the way up. We had wildflowers, giant snowy peaks around, blue glacial water, everything I enjoy. Although the hike was tough, really tough, especially because it was the first time we reached almost 4,700 meters. After driving all day the previous day, we finally arrived at our first base camp to start the Huayhuash trek, and we spent the night there. But that morning, my dad had never felt that sick in his entire life, and so he had to call it off. So I would have to do the full 8-day trek without him while he was waiting for a bus or someone that would be driving back to Huaraz and waiting for me there for 8 days. So this felt like a really crappy day. I still focused on photography as the views were already mind-blowing from the very first day. We arrived at camp and I decided to wake up in the middle of the night to shoot the Milky Way for the very first time on this trip. I could not believe my eyes. I had never seen the Milky Way like that, and I got incredibly excited. After waking up to a foggy sunrise, we headed to a day hike where we would come back to the same camp for one more night. This was really to maximize our chances of getting clear skies for night shooting and sunrise at that specific location. The hike was super steep, but the view we got up there quickly became a bucket list shot I wanted to capture. Unfortunately, to make it happen the way I wanted, it required me to hike there by night with one of our guys starting at 2 a.m., which was not possible on my first visit there. And I don't know what happened, but I knew I was coming back for this shot eventually. Back at camp, I decided to go for an ice plunge, not a nice plunge, and shower in the river nearby. It was the coldest water I've ever been in, and because it's running water, it's just so different than when it's a static plunge and the water is not flowing towards you. No wonder why people don't do it and would rather stay dirty until the end of the trek, and I really can't blame them. After an incredible sunrise and astro session that night, we started hiking back to the Mirador viewpoint. Only this time you hike further up to the pass to reach the next camp. There is something about seeing the end point of a hike where you think you are really close, but it's the same over and over again. It's so much further than what you actually analyzed. Anyway, we reached the pass and once again, an absolutely mind-blowing view of all the peaks and the turquoise lakes at their foot. Time to reach the highest point of the trek, 5,200 meters. By the time we reached that viewpoint, I could feel every step. Toughest ascent of the trek so far, but so worth it. And then we went down, and after dinner at the next camp, and after photographing the Milky Way, I decided to leave my camera outside the tent for a star trail. Now, we were warned to keep all of our stuff inside our tents at night because there were many stories of people getting their stuff stolen in the past. But for that specific night, it was basically us and another small group, but they were much further away from us. I figured it would be okay for this night. And so the terror started. After a few minutes of leaving the camera out and while trying to get some sleep, I hear 3 guys coming like 2 meters away from my tent. I couldn't believe it. And since they were speaking in Spanish, I could not understand what they were saying. Still, at that moment, I don't want to say anything or get out until I recognize the sound of a camera being clipped out of a tripod. Instant trigger. And so I started shouting at them to ask, what the hell are you doing here? What the hell are you doing in front of my tent? And I couldn't see them. They had headlamps and it was too dark for me to see, but they just told me they were going to take a few photos and leave within 10 minutes. Long story short, I ended up yelling at them again because it took more than 10 minutes and I was really scared for my equipment. The following morning, after the episode of the previous night, one guy from our group came to me and told me he was so sorry about last night. It took me a few seconds before my 2 neurons connected, realizing I had been shouting at group members, including Dan, the organizer. And before you say anything about how could you not recognize their voice? No, I could not, because 1, they were speaking in Spanish, and 2, they were whispering. Impossible for me to know if they were from the group or not. Anyway, no hard feelings, and we started heading out for our very last sunset of the trip. And that sunset, ladies and gentlemen, hit differently. I don't know if it was the exhaustion accumulated, the fact it was coming to an end, or simply the view that was more beautiful than anything I had witnessed so far, but tears started running down my cheeks, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. And it's not like I had never seen beautiful mountain views before, but there was something about that moment and sharing it with the people there that made it so special and memorable. On the last day we woke up in tents, my body just started shutting down. I started experiencing the worst cystitis I have ever had in my life, to the point I could almost not stand by the time we reached the bus. And what was supposed to be a 5 to 6 hour drive to Huaraz ended up taking 12 hours. Met my dad at the hotel, who looked a little bit better than the last time I saw him, but still very sick. And then our travel back to Switzerland was a bit hectic with cancelled flights, but we made it home anyway. This trip taught me a few valuable lessons. What used to be my previous ceiling became my new floor. And what I mean by that is that I had never done such a thing before, but now that it's done, it opens up to the possibilities of things you thought you couldn't do, but now you can. So, meaning hiking for several days, going above 5,000 meters altitude, all those things I didn't know I could do, has now become the base layer for the next adventure. 2, doing what you love with other passionate souls hits differently. Apart from the landscapes being so imposing and incredible, the people I shared the experience with made that trip what it was. And 3, I felt alive. I felt I was doing something that made me deeply fulfilled. And I decided that maybe this might be worth trying in life. If you enjoyed this kind of adventure that involves a lot of physical activity to reach those views, I highly recommend you experience this at least once. And bring people with you, because the secret is not in the adventure, it's in who you share it with. Hope you enjoyed this one. If you made it that far, thank you for your time. Comment, like, subscribe as always, and see you in the next one.